Welcome to GTC, Get Television Channel. I'm your anchor, Ananta.
And I'm Caitlin, your co-anchor. Today we'll be covering the French imperialism in Vietnam.
First off, what is Vietnam?
It's in the desert. Just kidding. Present-day Vietnam is a country in the Indochina Peninsula. Prior to French imperialism, Vietnam was split into three regions: Tonkin, Annam, and Cochin China. From 1887 to 1954, the region was imperialized by the French under the name of French Indochina.
That's right.
To speak more in depth about Vietnam before French imperialism, we brought in Vietnam history expert Sean Gao.
Someone say Vietnam? Thanks for having me today, guys. So, prior to the arrival of the French, Vietnam was controlled by its neighboring country, China, whose rule lasted hundreds of years. This long-lasting reign impacted Vietnam politically, socially, and economically.
So, can you tell us some more details about traditional Vietnamese culture?
Sure. Women held a surprising amount of authority at the time, and the first resistors to Chinese rule were women. Also, the level of education was unusually high, as 4 out of 5 Vietnamese learned how to read and write their own language using calligraphy brought by the Chinese.
Interesting. Do you want to take a seat?
Sure.
So what else is there about pre-imperialism Vietnam?
In the 1500s, Vietnam gained independence from China after many years of resistance. People lived in villages peacefully and were rarely disturbed by outside events. Heads of these villages were chosen based on their wisdom, education, and family status.
Interesting. Can you tell our viewers some information about their religion?
So traditional Vietnamese religion was heavily influenced by China prior to French imperialism. Vietnam adopted Buddhism, which was China's dominant religion. From the year 1010 to 1400 CE, Buddhism was considered Vietnam's official religion.
What about the economy? What do they eat?
So their environment was ideal for rice growing, which the Chinese taught them how to do once again. Though there were villages for crafts and trade, the majority of the economy came from agriculture.
That was nice to know. So, going back to religion, did Buddhism stay or did it change over time?
Yes, the religion definitely changed. During the rise of the Lei dynasty, Vietnam transitioned from Buddhism to Confucianism. Many Confucian scholars were also brought into court to work as court officials. The adoption of Chinese governmental and social customs led to the rise of the Nguyen dynasty.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Nguyen dynasty and how it operated?
Yeah, sure. The Nguyen dynasty's court used the Chinese Ming dynasty's Confucian law. It established a political structure centered on loyal subjects. Being considered divine, emperors did everything that traditional absolute monarchs did, but with the help of his highly ranked mandarins.
Cool. Is that all?
Yep, that's it. That's an overview of Vietnam before it's part of French Indochina. Viewers, if you'd like to explore the history of Vietnam more in depth, then you can go take a history class.
Good one. Well, thank you for being here, Sean.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Now back to Caitlin.
Now it's time for the interesting part of Vietnam's modern history, its imperial history under France. No offense, Sean. To talk about the subject, we brought in a real Vietnam historian, Trevor Sy. He's been interested in the subject for a while now.
Thanks for having me, guys. Now, I'll give a synopsis of what happened during imperialism, which lasted from 1887 to 1954. During imperialism, France controlled Indochina. Vietnamese who cooperated with the government, mostly out of self-interest, held French positions in local government, business, or economic institutions.
It seems like the French was there for their own benefit, not the people's.
For many European countries, France included, that's true. Instead of helping the people, they exploited them for resources. In this case, French imperialists hoped to impose their way of life over people and obtain in-demand products for economic profit through trade. This would fuel an economic boom in France via high tariffs on select products, which included rice, coal, rare minerals, and rubber. As a result, France experienced an economic boom while Vietnam's economy improved marginally due to a lack of profit reinvestment.
So did anything major happen during imperialism?
During World War II, when France had been conquered by Germany, Japan managed to control Vietnam through the weakened France. Then, Vietnam was under sort of dual imperialism, being controlled by both Japan and France at the same time, though the former was more prominent.
So how did the people feel about this occupation?
There was a mixed reaction to this. On the one hand, there were some people who welcomed Japan's government and claimed it was better than the French. But most people, well, they considered Japan's government to be the same as the French, if not worse.
But Vietnam decolonized under France's control. What happened to Japanese occupation?
Japan gave up Vietnam when they surrendered at the end of World War II, after the infamous atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Overall, how did France's imperialism impact Vietnam?
Vietnam's infrastructure modernized through French projects such as paved streets, automobiles, more buildings, and railroads. Transportation improved with the construction of more roads and bridges. Additionally, the French introduced electricity and the practice of modern medicine. They also replaced the Chinese characters with the Roman alphabet used in Western Europe.
It seems like the France imperializing them had many benefits. How did these changes help Vietnam?
Most of them didn't. French records state that these improvements benefited them almost exclusively. In fact, conditions for the Vietnamese may have been worse than pre-imperialism. In 1939, well into imperialism, no more than 15% of all children had any kind of schooling. On top of that, despite having more than 20 million people, in 1939 Vietnam had only one university with fewer than 700 students.
Thanks, Trevor. It seems like education in Vietnam was appalling.
It sure was.
Speaking of imperialism, did French colonialism in Vietnam ever end?
To explain more, we brought in Vietnam veteran and Vietnam historian Terry Chen.
If French colonization didn't occur, Vietnam wouldn't even be a country. In the early 20th century, Ho Chi Minh, a young journalist, turned to communism as the last resort to achieve an independent Vietnam. He also formed the Viet Minh, which was a guerrilla group originally created to counter the Japanese who occupied Vietnam in World War II.
Ho Chi Minh, that name sounds familiar.
Well, I mean, you may have heard of him from the Vietnam War, in which he played a great role in. In addition, he also declared independence for Vietnam on September 2nd, 1945, at the end of World War II. The France attacked Vietnam again in hopes of regaining control, and Vietnam surrendered in recognition for being a free state.
Oh, so that's where I heard of him. What happened after Vietnam surrendered?
Well, conflict broke out in December of 1946 when the Viet Minh attacked the French. In early 1954, the French were encamped at Dien Bien Phu, which was a heavily fortified base on the Laotian border. The Viet Minh then proceeded to siege the encampment. By mid-March, it became clear that French needed outside intervention.
Did any country try to help?
Well, the US wanted to prevent a communist victory, but they didn't want to intervene at the same time, so they just didn't do anything. As for the other countries in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they saw it as a lost cause, and, well, they also didn't do anything. So Dien Bien Phu fell in May, which resulted in the French retreat out of Vietnam.
There goes the French. I bet the Vietnamese will miss them. So what now?
So after the Geneva Conference in 1954, the French was forced to leave Vietnam, which was subsequently divided into a northern and southern region. The north was governed by Ho Chi Minh's Democratic Republic of Vietnam, while the south was taken by the state of Vietnam. Unhappy with this decision, the United States refused to accept this agreement and began to send in their military to fight for South Vietnam. This would later become known as the Vietnam War.
Phew! Vietnam sure had a lot of things going on back then.
Even today, many events are still influenced by the impact of French imperialism.
Really? How so?
Well, you see, Vietnam was recently a part of this Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal involving several countries. This deal was made to make more money in the Pacific Rim countries. By involving Vietnam in this trade agreement, Vietnam is shedding off its communist roots, which it got from direct reaction to French imperialism.
In direct reaction to French imperialism, how is that so?
Well, Ho Chi Minh, a nationalist, wanted Vietnam to be independent. However, he had to turn to Chinese communists for help. By accepting their help, Vietnam chose to be a communist government for various reasons. One of the main reasons was that the Vietnamese people saw capitalists as cruel, because France itself was capitalist and was cruel to the Vietnamese people. However, with this new trade agreement, Vietnam is shedding that way of thinking. And now one of their major trade partners is one of their oldest enemies, the United States.
Isn't that ironic that Vietnam's greatest enemy is now one of their best economic partners?
Quite so. The adoption of this trade agreement only shows progress in terms of Vietnamese government and ideals.
Well, cảm ơn các bạn cho xem các television center. Next time we'll be talking about North Korea and their glorious leader. Hope to see you soon.
Bye!